Hi and welcome to the second podcast for KV518, the Reflective Practice module, which runs all the way through year 2. I've posted some material on Student Central for you to have a look at, so please do look at that material before our next Saturday session. But the headlines or the kind of key themes for today's podcast, two key themes. One, under the title of Being Political. So I'll say a little bit about that in a second. And then the other headline is something which I'll call Context is Everything. So being political and context is everything. I guess the kind of overarching rationale for what I'm going to talk about today is that during year 1 of the course particularly, the focus is very much on your work directly with children and young people in the nursery, in the school, in the college, in the youth setting, wherever you're working, directly the work that you do with those children. And in year 2 we start to take a broader view and realise that we need to take into account not just exactly what's happening in that moment when you're working with that child and young person, but the broader range of influences and factors in that child's life and the way they are growing up. The point that kind of I started thinking about the podcast was when I was on the train recently, and there were a couple of students sitting just across from me. And I don't know about you, but when I'm on the train, particularly my own, I can't help but overhear people's conversations. Anyway, these two students were talking together. And the bit that caught my ear, if you like, was when one of them said, yeah, but the thing is, I'm not very political. And it kind of got me thinking, that phrase, I'm not very political. And I can't imagine, I think I know what she perhaps meant, which was in terms of perhaps the everyday nature of party politics or the way decisions are made in government or whatever weren't something that she perhaps directly took an interest in or perhaps didn't understand. I mean, I don't know, but that sense of I'm not very political. But it also made me thinking about the fact that because of our work in education, I guess I feel quite strongly that we can't be not political. But in order to kind of expand that a bit, I think I need to say a bit about what I mean by politics. And in this sense, I think when we talk about being political, it's to do with the ability to influence people's behaviour and people's actions and people's development within the social structure that we work within, that we live within. So that ability to influence and affect other people's actions, behaviour, in our case learning, within the system within which we live and work. So if you are into party politics, then you take a very kind of structural view of politics and that political act in terms of influencing people. As educators, as people working within children's learning and development, the political nature of our work is the way that we do influence people, and particularly children, of course, the way we help them learn, help them develop, challenge them in their learning and development in order for them to grow and become the people they're going to be. So that nature of politics being about influencing people, I think, is the emphasis that I want to take. But it also, within that, it also emphasises the context within which we're working. So we don't work with children and young people in a vacuum. We work with them in a context. We work with them in a structural context, if you like, the setting where we work, the nursery, the school, the youth centre, the college, wherever it might be. So there's a structural context, a setting that we work within. But I'm going to suggest that there are a whole bunch of other influences that contribute to that context. And it's understanding the nature of that context that I think is also important, hence the kind of subheading of today's session, context is everything. So being political, about influencing and helping people develop in a particular context, and then the notion that context is everything. And I'm going to suggest that context goes beyond the immediate setting. So let's think about then the way that children and young people grow and develop. And the bit of theory that I'm going to refer to here is that of Urie Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. And you were introduced to this in KV518, which is the Children and Young People's Development module that you probably took towards the beginning of year 1. And just to remind you, there's a really fantastic introduction to Bronfenbrenner's ecological development model in our wonderful book, Integrated Working with Children and Young People, available from all good booksellers. So do have a quick revise of Bronfenbrenner, and I've given you a couple of slides to go with that on Student Central to remind you as well. What Bronfenbrenner proposed, though, is that if we're thinking about a child or young person's development, and as I'm talking, maybe think about somebody you're working with currently, but also think about your own learning and development, particularly as a child, as a young person growing up. That as we grow up, our learning and development is contextualised, is set within a particular home setting, family setting, whatever that might be. But we also operate in a number of other settings which influence, and the obvious one being school or the nursery or playgroup or youth centre or whatever. And those looking after us, those that guide us and support us, either siblings or parents or family friends, whoever it might be, they also live and grow up and work within different settings, maybe a work setting or a social setting. So if you like, our own development and that of our children and young people are influenced by a whole number of different settings, different systems, as Bronfenbrenner called them, that nestle in within each other, a bit like Russian dolls. So the Bronfenbrenner model presents these different systems nested within each other. Moving from what he referred to as microsystems through to kind of the macro system of society. And the nature of society, the nature for us of Western European society and British society, and particular time that we're working and growing up in. So we happen to be in the early part of the 21st century, and the time that we're growing up in, that we're living and working within, is perhaps very different to the time that our parents grew up in and worked within. So the notion of time being really important. So Bronfenbrenner's point is that we work and grow and live within a whole series of systems, and the interaction of those systems has a significant influence on the way we learn and grow and develop as humans. So, in thinking about our practice, I'm going to ask you to think about a couple of different things. One is an increased awareness or a reconnection with the way that children and young people grow and develop within that nested set of systems, that ecological model that Bronfenbrenner proposed. And that every young person, every child that we work with, has a unique position within those different systems. If you like it, that's the bit of the nature-nurture argument, that's the nurture bit, their interrelationship with all of those different systems. But as practitioners, we will have a different position within the ecological map, if you like. We're older, certainly, that's one thing, but also our own background, our own family settings, our own environmental settings will have influenced in a different way. And we have to be careful in that sense not to make assumptions about a child or young person's developmental needs from the basis of our own cultural position. So culture is a very significant issue within that ecological framework, that ecological map that we're talking about. So what does this mean for us as practitioners? Well, I think it means, just going back to the notion about being political, it means that we recognise that we have a significant part to play in the development of that child, but that we have to recognise our position within that whole set of systems that the child or young person is developing within. And we have to recognise also that our position, our ecological map, if you like, may well be very significantly different to that of our child, of the child or the young person that we're working with. So that kind of difference between our own systems is important. The final bit that I'm going to ask you to think about as well then is the way that within those systems, the way that that part of that social fabric, if you like, is that there exists a whole range of inequalities. That the systems that we grow up in, that we develop in, and that the children and young people that grow and develop in are often very diverse, and within society, and the thing about, again, being political, is it's important to recognise that within society, within the systems and structures we work in, there are a whole range of inequalities that exist, which then cause an impact on that child's development to move in a particular way. So in other words, as well as seeing that child as a unique person in their own right, that young person as a unique person in their own right, we have to acknowledge the whole set of environmental, social, cultural, political issues which impact on that child. And that's kind of part of, I suppose, is the significant theme of year 2, that we start to understand those whole range of different factors that then influence that child, as well as the individual interaction, the individual relationship we have with those children and young people. Last kind of metaphor to leave you with is, Google Earth, where you can zoom in and you can see your house or your street or wherever you might be, and you can zoom in and you can see the detail of your front door or whatever it might be. But you can also then zoom right out and see from a much elevated position the whole of the environment or the town or the area that you work in. And if you like, what we're asking you to do is develop that ability to zoom right in and focus on the individual relationships and interactions you have with the children and young people you're working with, but also be able to pull the focus right back and see that work in context. So, over the coming week, think about the idea of being political, and being political in terms of understanding the range of influences that we work within and how we aim to influence and direct and support the development of the children and people we work with. But also have a think about understanding that notion that context is everything. That the system, the setting, the school, the college, the nursery, the youth setting, whatever, the system that you're working within currently is nested and is contained with a whole bunch of other systems which inevitably change over time. And that hopefully gives you a sense of how we see the course developing in this coming year, that you develop an increasingly nuanced and informed position of the nature of the systems, including the political systems that we work within, in order that we can become the best professionals that we can be. I hope that's been interesting and useful for you, and I look forward to seeing you on the module over the coming months.